Everyone, it's Emily Fox. Today's video is going to be kind of an update on how my reading year is going, kind of letting you know a little bit about my goals, but mostly reviewing out of the 25 books that I've read so far this year, which ones were the best one, the worst one, most disappointing ones, and just having fun with a bunch of recommendations or books to avoid. So as I mentioned, I have finished 25 books so far this year, which is not great because my goal is to read 100 books, so I should be closer to like 33. With that said, I have started a ridiculous amount of books and I'm currently trying to catch up on that. I have been in a slump ever since the whole pandemic thing, which Emily is like rocking that mask. So that's kind of what has been going on with me. I do go through mostly audiobooks lately just because I just can't focus. So with that said, I still have found some new favorite ones and then we'll go through the most disappointing ones after. Let's start with the positive though. The first book I gave 5 stars to in January was The Body, a Guide for Occupants by Bill Bryson. He is mostly known for his short history of nearly everything. Which one is it? I can never remember. You know the one I'm talking about. So this one is kind of the body version of that. It goes through a bunch of different parts of your body, kind of gives you a little bit of trivia, a lot of like fun information, kind of like where we're at discovery-wise, and it was really accessible, really interesting. I did go through it as an audiobook actually, and I do recommend it that way, or physical actually, because I do want to put some post-its on some parts that were really interesting. I really want to try and remember because they're just fun, you know, little things to tell people. Is it really deep? No. So if you're just someone that wants to learn more for fun, it's very, very nice. So really enjoy that one, definitely recommend it. Once I do like a best nonfiction book, I would definitely recommend this one, especially in like the beginner's version of it. The second book I wanted to mention is The Three-Body Problem, and like I'm not really including it, but I'm still going to talk about it, The Dark Forest, which is the second book in this series, because this is a very well-known hard sci-fi series, First Contact with Aliens. It's very science heavy, and I fell in love with it, especially in the second half of the first book. It's not easy to go through because nothing really makes sense in the beginning, and I don't know if it's a translation, but the writing can be kind of hard to go through. With that said, the concepts that are in there are so fascinating, and especially in the second half of the second book. So that's kind of why I'm like kind of including it, but kind of not. In the first book, I did have some issues with some of the characters, but it wasn't enough for me to reduce the rating. I still gave it 5 stars. I highly recommend it if you are someone that, once again, likes science heavy hard sci-fi. But I wanted to include this one too because the second half is mind-blowing, but I kind of want to just rip out each page of the first half and just tear it into little tiny pieces and one by one put it in fire. That's how bad it was. It's just because the female characters especially kind of suck. I know they are pretty much stereotypes of like, you know, Chinese ideal woman. You're constantly reminded that they're, you know, child looking, innocent, slender, pretty, all that stuff. And it was, you know, you could bear with it in the first one, but the second one is like literally nonstop. So if you can push through, I do still recommend it because, again, the concept of this one are interesting, but in the second book, I really want to mention the title, which if you want to know like zero spoilers, I would put on the screen spoiler, but not really because I don't really think it's a spoiler. But if you like science concept, alien concepts, you need to read this because if you are familiar, for example, I've heard a lot about the Fermi paradox, like the reasons basically aliens have not contacted us. And that one is really well known, but I didn't know this one. And I don't know if actually the author thought about it, but really terrifying. So basically any type of life form wants to stay alive and you can't trust any other life form to not kill you. So like they could lie, they could just pretend. So you don't have a choice but to kill them in order to survive, because even if you are not, you know, a bad alien, if they are shouting into space that they exist, it means other ones will go and kill them. So it's kind of the concept of the dark forest, meaning that the space is the dark forest and then each different life form is a hunter. And that would explain the reason why we haven't heard from any aliens, which when you think about it, humanity has been like screaming in space for a few years now. So yeah, that's reassuring, but definitely super interesting. So if that's something you are into, I would definitely recommend this trilogy. I have yet to read the third book. I will very soon. It's probably going to be, you know, in the second version of this video. Hopefully it will be 5 stars. But yes, even though the first half of the second book, like the first literally 50% were, I still would recommend it. This was not a 5 stars, it was a 4 star, but it was probably still going to be, like if I do top 5, it's probably the 5th one anyway. So the 5 stars and the The third book that made it into the best category so far of the year, it is Starsight by Brandon Sanderson. Obviously, this is a YA sci-fi, and this was really great. I was a little scared to go into it because everyone was saying how it's super different from the first book, so they were kind of disappointed. And I wasn't. The first book is definitely focused on the remnant of humanity trying to survive a bunch of aliens attack. In this one, the world becomes a lot bigger and becomes more political intrigue really than the first one. The first one, there's a lot of spaceship battles, and there still are, but it just becomes more complex, which usually happens in a series. There's always a boom, a big reveal at the end of the first book, and then things become bigger and bigger throughout the whole series. And since this is book 2, it just started a little bit and it ends on, again, a big boom, which means that the third book is probably going to become, you know, even bigger. What I really enjoy with this series is that you really get to see the character grow. In the first book, in the beginning, she's really unlikable, but she obviously becomes a better person throughout the whole series. Second book, she's definitely better. You still get to see Doomslug, which you need to read it to get it. I was actually pleasantly surprised by some of the stuff that was in here, but because I don't feel like I associate Brandon Sanderson with some of the concepts that were in here. I've been mentioning that it kind of reminded me a little bit of The Long Way to Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers, how there's like a bunch of aliens and you kind of learn more about how they function. And it was a lot more wholesome than I expected from him. So I'm just gonna end it there. Do recommend this highly, whether you like YA or not. If you want to give sci-fi a shot, I would definitely recommend this series. This was another 5 stars for me. And last one, I really want to mention also Invisible Women, which is a nonfiction book about bias, data bias, and how it affects women in multiple, and not just women really, in multiple ways. And it's a very interesting and incredibly frustrating read. I do highly recommend it. You will most likely have to put it down once in a while. I will link down below. I did, I believe, a vlog where I was reading this. So if you want to like have specific examples that I mentioned throughout the read, definitely recommend checking that out, because I don't even want to talk about it because I'm so frustrated with just thinking about it, but it's definitely worth the read. I also wanted to give a shout out to a book as a most surprising read so far of the year. Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson. And this is a YA fantasy. And full disclosure, I have nothing against YA, clearly I just mentioned one, but I have had a complicated relationship with the really popular ones on BookTube. I feel like very often, I don't know if I'm too old or it's just not my jam anymore or whatever, but like once in a while I still find some that I really, really enjoy, so I keep doing it to myself. And I was scared that this wasn't going to be worth the hype, and it was good. It wasn't like, you know, good enough to be in my best of, but definitely a surprisingly wholesome read. I really enjoyed the world because the main character essentially lives in a library or wants to work there, and the library is magical. So if you want to make me read something, definitely put a magical library and I will read it. And this was really interesting. My only issue was definitely towards the end, which was kind of just a little bit of a letdown. But overall, I do recommend it if you are someone that usually enjoys YA fantasy. I think this is going to be right up your alley. Now let's go to most disappointing. Full disclosure, I feel like I've read a bunch of really disappointing books so far this year. I have been trying to read a bunch of books that I thought I was going to love, so I feel like my expectations were kind of high, so whenever you get finally around to reading a book and you thought you were going to love it and you don't, it's like extra annoying. So one of those books was Fundraiside by Robert Jackson Bennett, and this is a adult fantasy book, actually series, the first book. And I went into this book really thinking I was going to give it 5 stars. A lot of people were saying how the magic system was comparable to something by Brandon Sanderson, which it usually has some really interesting world building that will really make a lot of sense throughout the whole series, and the magic system is usually really well defined and just makes sense, and it's just complex in a good way. And I did enjoy the magic system. I don't really agree that it's that similar, but on its own it was still intriguing. The characters were kind of so-so. The story I just ended up not really caring, and a few things ended up bugging me more and more throughout the read. My favorite character was actually a talking key, which is definitely not something I thought I would ever say, so that's definitely a positive. On Goodreads, I actually included the one scene that really stood out to me, because sometimes, you know, something rubs you the wrong way and you're not exactly sure how to express it, but that one scene is just the perfect example. There's a scene where I believe is the main male character, right? He's a prince and he's looking at his mom and he thinks she was still beautiful, but she was also looking her age, which, since when do sons are this obsessed with the wrinkles of their mom? I what is that a thing? But yeah, that was just like one thing. Overall, it just didn't live up to my expectations. I really thought I was going to love it, so that's definitely a huge meh for me. Another one I really wanted to complain about, I guess, it's Middlegame by Shauna Marie. I have been reading her We Were Children series. They're all like very short books. They're like 200 pages usually. And my main complaint was usually the fact that I wanted more. I always wanted more because there was not enough meat because it was so short. And she came out with a standalone adult fantasy book, and I was so excited because her writing is amazing and she creates really interesting world building and magic system too. And I am, let me tell you what it's about. You're following twins, which are called, let me check that name because you won't believe it. It's Dodger and Roger. They are siblings linked by quantum entanglement, and they have like powers, I guess superpowers, it's more than magic system really, that are linked to language and maths, which really unique, really interesting, but everything else was just did not care about the characters, did not care whatsoever about where the story was going. I do not recommend the audiobook, which I did because I tried reading it and I couldn't get into it, so I decided to try the audiobook. And the first hour, you're following certain characters that have like the worst narration voices ever. So it was a really huge struggle. The book is like 500 pages, so I really pushed through hoping that things would pick up and I would just, you know, be like, oh, you know, if you push through, things get better. They did not. I didn't care for the ending, made no sense to me. I just resented having to read this because it was part of the Goodreads challenge I'm doing. So what the actual was this? Yeah, huge disappointment for me. I really thought, again, I was going to like it, but I really didn't, so hence this mention here. Actually, I don't know if this is part of the worst or most disappointing, but here it is. Again, I don't know if this one should be in the worst or most disappointing. Let's just group them all together. It's more simple. I'll think about it for the end of the year. The Secret Commonwealth by Philip Pullman. I absolutely adore the Is Dark Material trilogy. That it came out years ago, read them as a kid, blew my mind, broke my heart, was awesome. Is it considered YA? It's fantasy, kids can love it. I reread it as an adult. It totally stood the test of time, and it's probably even better as an adult just because I get a bunch of the references that went way over my head. I know there was a bunch of controversy actually from that world because it seems to be against religion, but it's technically more against organized religion. So this is the second book in the companion series. The first one was a prequel, and this is finally the follow-up. You follow Lyra as an adult. I think she's 20? Yes, and you get to go back into this world where, you know, people have demons. It's like part of their soul. They're like best friends. I have been dying for this book literally my whole life, and I kind of hated it. I have no idea where the story is going. It doesn't seem to be well established. I hate so many things about it. First off, there is someone that is into someone. I'm gonna keep it super vague, but that is essentially a kid, and he's saying how he's been into her since she was like 14 or 15. It's just like, what the actual F? Like, why is this a thing? Why? And I think my biggest complaint, which I don't think this is a spoiler, shouldn't be because I think it's a trigger warning, there's an attempted rape scene that was absolutely pointless. Why is this a thing? I did not expect that from this author at all. It actually took me 3 months to read this, and I actually had to finish it as an audiobook because I could not force myself to sit down and read it. So this is probably so far my biggest disappointment of 2020. Probably will still be by the end of the year. Again, I don't know if this is considered the worst or just disappointment. It's just like, it's more disappointment than really bad. It is still bad though. It's just that I thought I was going to love this. Once again, maybe I should go into books with no expectations, but it's kind of hard when like the author wrote one of your favorite series and then you get that. And that is a big book, but literally nothing happens. So yeah, I would love to hear your opinion on this book if you have read it, because at this point I hated 2 books out of 2 in this new companion series. So will I read the next one? Of course. I am very, very stubborn, and I apparently hate myself a little bit. So it will still happen. I will let you know how it goes, but why? Why? As far as definitely the worst book that I've read this year, I wanted to talk about The Need by Ellen Phillips. This is supposed to be horror. I guess. It's very, very short. It's not even 300 pages. I did go through it once again as an audiobook. We're seeing a pattern here. I did mention it. I struggled to finish books. Quite frankly, I decided to pick it up just because it was a runner-up in the Goodreads challenge, but also just because I had no audiobook at the moment and it was just available at my library. So clearly not my smartest moment because it was such a fail to me. Actually, to be fair, it starts intriguing, but the whole thing. Actually, at first I was going to skip it just because I had been told that even though there was a nice twist towards the end, it followed a mom, which is not really my favorite thing. I feel like I've read too many like domestic thrillers and I expected it to be like that. It wasn't. Technically, it was one of those books that you're reading and the whole time you're wondering what the actual F you're reading. The problem, like it could be a good thing, but in this case it wasn't. And by the end, I still felt like that. As far as the mom thing, do not recommend going through this as an audiobook because there is a scene where kids are just yelling mommy at her literally 50 times. And I remember, I think I was in my shower or something and I was stuck listening to mommy, 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 mommy. And I just wanted to grab my speaker and throw it as hard as I could at the wall. So do not do this to yourself. Yes, at this point, I think my uterus has shriveled and died multiple times. I do not recommend this book at all. If you have read it and hated it, please let me know in the comment section because I would like to complain with you. And actually, if you can explain to me the ending, feel free to do so because still don't know. And at this point, really, I'm considering just reducing the number, like for my challenge, it was 100 books I wanted to read on Goodreads. I'm thinking about just putting it at 50 just so I don't stress about it. Not that I'm feeling very stressed really. I've just been feeling kind of meh about reading, which is not good for me. But right now I'm currently reading The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson, which is amazing. I do struggle to still sit down and read it, but at least it's awesome when I do it. So I feel like it's gonna help me get out of my slump because if I do love it, I have the next 2 books that are still each like 1,000 pages, but at least it's good, you know? So that's gonna be it for today's video. I really hope you enjoyed it. Please feel free to leave in the comment section your best and worst books of the year so far and how you are doing with your own reading challenges. Thumbs up, subscribe. I will be putting on the screen more videos that I recommend you check out, and I shall see you in my next one very soon. Bye.